All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Oberski. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a PhD candidate in the entomology program at the University of California, Davis. Today, I'm excited to welcome you to another conversation in my series of panels about mental and chronic illness and academic professional development. And this project is supported by the UC Davis Grad Pathways Institute for Professional Development through the Professors for the Future program. I have several guests today. Thank you for being here. Before we start, I'm going to introduce one of my guests, whose name is Dee, who will be participating via the chat box. So, Dee says, "Hello, I'm a PhD in biophysics who graduated last quarter. I've been struggling with health issues most of my life. When I first joined my program quite some time ago, student health cut down severely on my psych medication, and then shortly after, couldn't deal with medication management when things weren't working. Student health was also struggling to deal with my other health issues as well. I had to take my first PELP, that is planned educational leave, to get better health care with a job of some sort. In order to keep my better health insurance when I came back, I had to keep working. Finishing my PhD while working proved to be quite arduous, but eventually I got to the point where all necessary publications were submitted to peer-reviewed journals, but right before getting news of acceptance of the last publication, I had a heart attack. 2 weeks later, I was hospitalized again due to a kidney injury from complications with associated medicine. Then 2 weeks after that, I had a series of strokes from clots in my heart. I have been dealing with cycles of neurological, kidney, and cardiac issues ever since. Luckily, I had a very supportive PI. I'm not sure I would be done without that. Looking for work, the push among employers to return to on-site work, everything in person, is making it hard for me to find a good job." So that's Dee's introduction. Thank you for joining us, Dee. My personal story is that I have bipolar disorder, bipolar 1, and I was diagnosed halfway through college and immediately had to deal with some really terrible medications that were wrong for me and all of the side effects that were associated. And I luckily had very understanding mentors along the way. But I also had one who was not that helpful, and we are no longer on speaking terms. So it's definitely been a journey, and trying to find the people that will support me when I'm not being my most productive has been, something that's been difficult to navigate. And I have one more guest with us. Could you introduce yourself in your own voice?
Howdy, y'all. I'm Heather Ringo. I'm a third year PhD student in the English department, specializing in environmental humanities. And hearing both of your stories really reverberates with my experience. I'm actually a non-traditional student, so I was able to get through most of my master's degree all the way through Berkeley for my BA, and then my master's degree at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And then after that, I actually left academia for a little while and worked as a teacher and then for county parks. And my disabilities were manageable because they're invisible. So I could put on a mask and grit through, even though personally and privately, I was not managing well. And I loved my job for the county parks, working outdoors with kids, teaching. But with the wildfires starting in 2017, the air quality got really bad. I don't know if y'all remember the smoke. And unfortunately, my asthma became unmanageable. I was having asthma attacks at work, severe. I was taking medication that caused my nose to just start bleeding all the time. And I kept getting infections and lung infections. So unfortunately, I had to give up the job I loved. And I thought, what a great time. I've always wanted to complete my PhD, finish my education. This is a great time to go into academia for me, where it's going to be more accessible given my disabilities. And indeed it was. In 2020, though the COVID-19 pandemic was very scary for all of us as disabled folks, especially, what it did do is it enabled everybody to work remotely. And that actually made going to class, going to school, managing my disabilities way more accessible. And I actually thrived being able to participate in that way. Unfortunately, like it sounds both of you, the issue wasn't my disabilities, it was the way academia responded to them. So when everything started to shift back in person, I had a PI who was hostile, saying discriminatory things about disabled people, not knowing that I was disabled, but talking about students and mocking them for having mental illnesses, which I spoke up about and faced backlash for. And then when I needed accommodations and I got them after fighting for them hundreds and hundreds of hours, this PI, who is also a supervisor because of our dual role as student and worker, refused to implement the accommodations the university had granted me. So I got pushed out of that program. And then speaking up for myself, kind of like you said about the non-speaking terms, ended up kind of torpedoing that person and the resources that they had and their connections. So navigating that in a professional development environment and trying to find those supportive people. Luckily, I have found supportive community and a new PI that's supportive, but it's still tricky. So anyways, thank you.
Yeah, that, wow, rings true. Yeah, and Dee, if you'd like to contribute, please just share whatever you like in the chat whenever you like, and I will read it out for the call for people listening. Yeah, that it's so tricky when you're trying to make your way as a student, but you need people to write recommendation letters, but you need to speak up for yourself and advocate for what you need, but you don't want to step on any toes. Like, have you tried to position yourself as like being as non-problematic as possible when asking for accommodations or help for things, or do you have confidence when you're navigating these conversations? Like, I know what I need, I'm gonna get it. Personally, I think I tend to shy away a little bit from the direct confrontation, and I try to like make myself seem as gentle as possible. It seems like I shouldn't have to do that, but are there ways that you are there ways that you change that like confidence level or the gentleness level?
Can I read Dee's comment in the chat?
Sure.
Dee wrote, I actually found people were more supportive when my health issues became visible rather than dealing with the invisible form. And yeah, on that note, not quite related to that comment, but I also reverberate with that. Depending on, it's so dependent, right? Like both in terms of when visible and invisible disabilities, how people respond to them is dependent on the person, is dependent on the context. And similarly, when trying to determine an approach for self-advocacy can be challenging for those same reasons, those same complex dynamics. My approach is generally, I will start kind and assume best intentions, and with educational, because I'm a teacher, right? I'm like, oh, this person probably doesn't have the information they need. Here's the information in a approachable, palatable format. And oftentimes that does get results. However, if a person is non-responsive to the gentle call-ins, at that point, I escalate. And it's gotten to the point where choosing my battles is really important. And sometimes, for example, if a conference says we're not going to provide remote opportunities to participate, whereas in the past, I've fought that and fought for my rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Increasingly, I'm deciding, okay, I'm just going to seek out the places that want me. But yeah.
Yeah, which obviously seems inherently unfair because there are fewer opportunities available if you're only choosing the places that are gonna welcome you with open arms, but D says, to be honest, I didn't fight. I had to prioritize health and take a leave. It slowed me down, but there's some formal support for that. And I think that's really important. I was talking to the people from the Disability Management Services and the Student Disability Center, and I asked what the most common form of accommodation was. And basically, it's just leave, taking time off to deal with hopefully the most severe part of your ailments, and then coming back hopefully with more energy and more health is the best way to do things. Dee also says it is unfair and slowed my career for sure, and that makes absolute sense. Yeah, I think it doesn't surprise me that people were more supportive when the health issues became visible, because there's a different level of stigma, I feel, for visible disabilities that are health related, and people can like understand when someone has a broken leg that they can't walk up the stairs. But if people are struggling to get out of bed and remember things, like I remember having terrible memory when I was first starting my bipolar medications, and trying to learn in a lab environment when my short-term and long-term memories were just toast was absolutely miserable, but I couldn't articulate that to my professor. So I think you might have to handle it differently when self-advocating, when it's visible versus invisible. Maybe even requiring more self-advocacy for invisible things, because people are less likely to recognize that there is a problem.
And I think something that Dee said in the chat too, it's unfair and slowed my career for sure. I agree that there is the formal option that the university provides, for example, tends to be PELP and pushing to PELP. And I also had to take PELP. And it was helpful because I was having health issues that, I needed to focus on and heal. At the same time, there are so many cases where we could be accommodated and still keep doing our work and making our progress on our own timeline. And I think that's one of the things about invisible illnesses too, or chronic illnesses, is that there's this assumption that in the broader society that, oh, you get sick, it's like a broken leg and then you heal and then you're better.
Exactly.
And there's this expectation that it's like a magic thing that, okay, you're going to take a PELP and then you'll be good. But the reality of chronic illnesses, especially mental illness, and then with me, like my asthma too, and I also have PTSD, is that like I had healed my PTSD prior to deciding to enroll in the PhD program, and then the pandemic hit. And then a bunch of other terrible things happened. And so I have a resurgence of symptoms, right? And even one day to the next, I can feel I'm great today. But real life is happening out there, and trauma happens. We just had trauma here at UC Davis.
No kidding.
And trigger warning, or, there's violence, there's people being harmed actively. And so for me, that's triggering. So now, like you're saying, my memory is less good, less functional right now than it was prior to this. And then I'll pass it to Dee.
Great. Dee says in the chat, I'm bipolar too, and I think mismanagement of this is part of what led to all the other things. It was second on my list of chronic issues. And yeah, it's so important to recognize the chronic actually means long term. It often is thrown around as a I don't know, a more general word for like, this is a serious problem, but it actually, it indicates that it's a long-term thing that isn't just going to get better. Chronic pain, chronic illness. And I have had conversations with professors who have said things along the lines of, oh, I understand that you're depressed. I was depressed once. And then I got better. And that's not always how that works. So explaining that to people has been tricky sometimes. Because, yeah, like you said, I'm also a teacher, so my instinct is that, oh, they just don't have all the information. Let me give them some more information so that they can understand the situation. But I don't know, when you're trying to educate people who are superior to you in the workforce or in the academic mentoring environment, there are some weird ego things that can get in the way. Yeah. Dee, can you elaborate on the mismanagement of your bipolar 2? I'm just yeah, wondering how it related to the other conditions that you've mentioned. Dee gained a lot of weight, which led to diabetes. Yeah, and diabetes comes with its whole list of associated health conditions like high blood pressure. Dee had. Yeah. Well, thank you. That really paints the picture of how starting with bipolar 2, a very invisible mental illness, um, led to some more like physiological recognized things that other people could see in you. Um, yeah.
I think
And
that's, sorry, go ahead.
no, go for it.
I think that also speaks to another misconception that folks have about disabled colleagues is that we become like almost labeled with whatever, if we out ourselves with, which is very risky, with what our diagnosis is, we become that diagnosis and it's almost like that's us, right? But the reality is that we are often, we have comorbidities, right? So like I have chronic illness and I have mental illness, and they're not two separate spheres. So when I'm having bad asthma, I have to get on steroids. Steroids are not good for PTSD. And with, I also have depression. So caffeine is one of the ways that I become functional. I self medicate with caffeine. Unfortunately, caffeine also amps up PTSD symptoms. So it's this
Cheers.
balancing act, right? Cheers. It's this balancing act. And so, you know, I guess something that's been helpful in navigating professional development, there are going to be folks who are hostile. There's kind of, I'm going to call them like hot, warm, and cold, right? There's people who are hot to supporting you, right? That are like, I understand you. I get what you're saying. You know, maybe they have someone in their family or maybe they're disabled. Those people are great. Then you have like warm folks who are like, I want to support you, but I don't know what's going on. Or maybe they're kind of tentative. And then you have cold people who are like, I'm hostile. I have ingrained stigma towards this. And you know they're never gonna. And so when I'm navigating professional development or self advocacy, I'm kind of trying to find the hot and the warm people to sort of gravitate towards. And those are the people that maybe, for example, I would explain in, I mean, I don't want to advocate anyone outing themselves or like having to disclose because actually the ADA says we don't have to do that. Unfortunately, my experience has been a lot of folks don't understand until you kind of like share. Unfortunately, I've had to share like really horrible things to get people to be sympathetic to what's going on. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple things you said that really connected with me. So I love the idea of categorizing people. I mean, I guess I already did it, but having categories for like hot people, warm people, cold people, people that will like fight for you, people that are like, I agree with you, but they don't know how to take action to support you. And then the people who just think you're making a big deal out of nothing or that sort of thing. Um, I yeah, have been lucky to have more warm to hot people in my professional timeline than cold people. But do you have a good support network right now where you are in your PhD?
I'm not sure if you're talking to me or Dee, but while Dee is formulating their response, I'm happy to give mine.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I've actually found that the if I had one piece of advice, if there's anyone watching this who's maybe in their first year or second year, is actually finding a group of folks, maybe disabled folks, maybe, you know, that are, we'll say, hot or warm people, right? The people who are going to be your support team, and communicate with them regularly, make a signal chat, hang out with them, do whatever you need to do, because you're going to need that, because a lot of the world is going to be kind of hostile to your existence, and they can advocate for you. So when there's a cold person we come across who's actively hurting us, we will band together and kind of support each other through that. And then, yeah, now that I feel I have sort of my team, my dissertation committee, et cetera, who I chose specifically for their expertise, but also because they were supportive of me, which honestly, in my opinion and my experience and talking to other marginalized folks from various backgrounds, having a supportive committee is, if you can find it, one of the most crucial choices in professional development. And Dee says, um, not much support since I don't have a placement. I started a company. There's a lot of support of that. For that, however, I had to control my work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have also found that having people around me that, even if they're more tangentially related to my work or research, having supportive people in my community has been so helpful. I didn't join my lab because I loved the research and it was my top like research interest when I started. I joined the lab because it felt like family. And that has been by far the most important thing to my mental health and physical health over the past 6 years. Um, but if people don't have much support, like if uh, Dee and other people are in the workforce, working remotely, starting companies, and not within the little university bubble any longer because Dee graduated, congratulations. Then I have found, you're welcome. I've found that Twitter has actually been a really great place for connecting with people in the disability community, both visible and invisible disabilities, people who will be public about their struggles and talk about it. And just knowing you're not alone in the difficulties you're experiencing is so important. So that's part of what keeps me going with sharing my bipolar diagnosis, is that I've had other people in my field and in my graduate group come up to me and say, I was just diagnosed too. Can we talk about things? What have you tried? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? And making those connections and helping other people out has been great, because sometimes the external support just is not there. Yeah. UC Davis for me has been largely supportive. Um, and I'm lucky in that regard. Would you agree or disagree from your side of campus?
Um, while Dee is formulating a response, I'll go ahead. I'm going to try and be realistic yet also optimistic. For me, I've worked, because I've kind of took this non-traditional path. I've actually worked at a lot of universities, colleges, high school. I've had a lot of experiences. UC Davis has, for me, been the least supportive, and the least flexible and the most hostile. It's been a mix, though. It's not to say everybody is, but I'm saying the system itself
Yeah.
is kind of, yeah. But I would say that my like humanities as a whole, there's sort of this understanding that humanities is like warm and fuzzy and nice. Um, not so much. I think that it's there are folks in there who are truly supportive and justice minded, and others who are not. And I would say that actually DMS is doing better than they were. Um, it seems like they've gotten a new director who, at least for me, has required less. Previously, they're making me prove my permanent disabilities every single quarter, which was taking an immense amount of time, costing a lot of money. I was at the doctor all the time for things I didn't need to be. At this point, I'm very grateful that they've not made me have to re-get my paperwork every single quarter. And that's made a huge difference in my time and the amount of time I have to dedicate, say, on like professional projects. So it's a mix for me. Go
Absolutely.
ahead with D.
Yeah, D says UC Davis was supportive compared to the general workforce, but student health in particular needs a lot of work. The people are friendlier at Davis, but the healthcare is better outside. And that, yeah, I could see that. Student health, I feel like, is for more, I don't know, it's for general aches and pains and, you know, birth control placement and just little small scale like student health concerns and not chronic problems. But there are plenty of students with chronic issues that need to be treated. And I don't think we are given a very good overview of what our options are in terms of insurances and healthcare providers, because we aren't necessarily restricted to student health, but it's the only easy option and often the cheapest option, which is awfully tricky. But I'm very thankful for my UC Davis psychiatrist, so shout out to her.
That's great to hear, actually. And I kind of have a question for both of you as well, because I've heard mixed things about the mental health support at Davis. How fast were you able to get care established?
Well, I have definitely heard from other folks that if during their time at Davis they develop a concern or they want to start counseling or they want to start seeing a psychiatrist, then it takes a very long time to get appointments. And that's basically unacceptable if you're dealing with mental illness. So things need to be taken care of straight away. I was in a very good place with my health and mental health when I started at Davis, and I was very proactive in establishing a relationship with the health center. And so I've been using a UC Davis psychiatrist for the past 6 years, and it's been great. We meet every couple of months, and I suppose this is also a case of I've had it pretty easy the past few years. But all of the small changes I've had to make to my regimen have been relatively easy. I can imagine, though, if things are more tumultuous for you, that it would be not enough support. That's quite easy for me to imagine. D says, my experience may be outdated because I gave up on student health over 5 years ago. I did complain to them back then.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to hear folks in their first or second year what their experience is now. Because at least dealing with students and trying to support students has been very heartbreaking. Because we're not just, a lot of us, those of us who are doing teaching, for example, are not just students or not just PhD students. We're also carers, right, for students. And part of my mental health exacerbation has been how I feel like I'm there, the systems are inadequate for supporting students, and therefore I'm, letting them down somehow.
Yeah.
And from students, I've heard that they have very long wait lists, that they've tried and tried and tried to get in. And so I am privileged in some ways because I rely on my husband's health insurance from his much better job to give me the health care I need. And even
Right.
I'm having to wait, a month or two between appointments, which is much better than the 3 to 4 months I was having to wait before.
Yeah.
But it's not enough. It's not, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. I have been optimistic because I've been getting emails from the college about like the telehealth mental health services that UC Davis is paying for now for students to use. But I don't know anything about how effective those are, how easy it is to get appointments. But at least there seems to be more of an effort post-pandemic than pre-pandemic in providing mental health support for students. But that's just a distant impression, I guess. D says, I had a very long wait list myself. It was 3 to 4 months for me. And yep, that happens.
and that actually brings me to another, I don't know if it's so much a professional development point, but maybe like a support point for folks who are newly into the system or maybe haven't sought care yet, is that you had said, Jill, like you were able to kind of build a relationship or find that, set that up ahead of time, kind of. And I guess that would make my suggestion too, is to, before you need it, start establishing these relationships and connections to these services, and also have backup plans if possible. And these networks that I was talking about earlier about like having an outside support system, whether that's in your department or outside your department or in your community, that you can kind of ask about resources or support.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is trying to recognize when you're in a good place, because things get better and they get worse and they get better and they get worse. Recognize when you're in a good place and take the time and energy then to prepare for the times to come that won't be so good. Because when, for example, I'm in a depressive spiral, I don't have the energy or the bandwidth or the motivation to repeatedly call doctors and try to set up appointments, and that's just not going to happen. So it's easy to just like want to sit back and enjoy the good times, but there also needs to be like preparation for the worst season. He says, I have to say both of you have been / are more proactive than I have been. I want to be more so myself. But I consider my proactivity to be kind of just lucky, if that makes sense. A lot of people don't have the opportunity to be proactive because they're in the trenches.
Yeah, and this also kind of speaks to this idea of, I would say one of the hardest things to navigate is this expectation that if somebody isn't getting the care that they need, that it's their fault. And I guess destigmatizing the fact that, yeah, sometimes, like, especially if you have a mental illness or a chronic illness, that can get in the way of you getting the care you need as well. So you're navigating not only like the disability, but also the barriers erected by the institution, that sort of thing. So yeah, Dee, I just want to speak back to what you're saying. I don't want to invalidate, but I do want to say that I think you're probably, I mean, my assumption is doing the best you can do with what you have. And I wish that our systems were more collective, less individualistic, and less stigmatizing.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering, in the context of professional development, how do each of you feel about the health insurance question? because trying to move forward in academia, we're faced with short-term contracts, we're faced with unpredictable outcomes of interviews. There's no guarantee you're going to get funding. We're faced with frequent moves, maybe across the country between different institutions. So you have to change healthcare systems and all of that. Yeah, how have you managed that, / do you see managing that in the future? I have a feeling we're all gonna have similar answers. D says, right now I'm struggling financially too. My wife's work provides good health insurance, but it's below living costs. And I think reliance on a partner's health insurance is a major safety net that people with disabilities use, is trying to keep a job themselves, but having a partner that can reliably have health insurance so that one person always does is an absolute necessity.
Yeah, I'm very privileged in this regard. I literally could not survive or get my health care or anything if it weren't for my husband's work. Um, and earlier, Dee had talked about like having to work on top of school, like on top, and that's been my experience as well. I also have another job that I've taken a break from right now. But this is going to be an annoying answer, and I'm sorry to get in my soapbox of my union spiel. But my other workplace that has a functional union has successfully won us a cost of living adjustment, is currently working on establishing better health insurance for even adjuncts. And I think my optimistic self is that we just, for the UAW 2865, which is our union here at UC Davis, we just elected a reformer to our presidency, Sean Fain. We just turned over our local union leadership to folks who are specifically fighting for disability protections. And in about 2 years, we're going to have to negotiate a new contract. We also have, currently you have contract protections specifically for disability, for health coverage, for all these things, that if you face, for example, if you're being pressured to go on PELP, or the thing about PELP, by the way, for those you both probably know, but folks might not know, is when you go on PELP, you lose your insurance or you have to pay for it, and you also lose your income. So you can't really pay for it. So you kind of, disabled folks, unless they have a spouse, just are, I'm not going to swear, but they're left out in the cold. Yeah. And so there's, if you're in a place where you feel like, okay, I'm being discriminated against, or my disability is making it so I have to drop out, or whatever, or I'm being pushed to PELP, contact your union reps ASAP for UAW 2865 and establish that relationship, and file a grievance. Document everything, every single email that you have, communicating with your supervisor, CC yourself on your private email, take records of everything. If you have a meeting that's only voice, take notes, collect everything, date it, save it, and folks will work with you to advocate for your protections.
Yes. And that doesn't just go for UC Davis. If people are listening who are at other places, see if you have a union, get involved. Regardless, document everything. You can probably take it to HR if nobody else. And D says, regarding the relying on spouses during PELP, the planned educational leave, I wasn't married during my first PELP. I had to find work, which I didn't realize. I've never taken PELP myself. I've been lucky enough to not need to do that here at Davis. That you lose your insurance?
You'll have to pay, I don't know what the cost is now. You'll have to pay out of pocket to keep it, which the last I checked was like $1,400 or something, like basically half of our paycheck or more. And yeah, and you lose income. So you're giving up income, and you're giving up also access to most university services. So
that's insanity. It's when you need the most support and they're taken away. Okay. Anyway, D says, it's part of why I started a small business. Once it gets going, I hope to provide for myself and then later employees with good healthcare and disability insurance. Amazing. Yes. Okay. Disability solidarity. Love this. We're coming up on the last 5 minutes or so. Do I want to ask an optimistic or a pessimistic question? Let's go with, what advice do you have for people who are thinking about grad school, thinking about beyond grad school, trying to work in the fields of university life and research and academia in general? What would be like your top thing that has helped you thus far that you would advise other people take with them? D says, have a supportive mentor. Absolutely agree, 100%. Even if that mentor is like, in addition to your mentor on paper, have a supportive mentor, build a network of mentors that you can talk to and work with in order to best support you from 5 different angles, you know?
I agree with that 100%. My mentor is not like this rock star expert in my field, but is a kind, supportive person who also is able to help me sort of navigate the terrain and use their power of tenure, which is powerful, albeit less so continuously, but to kind of advocate and make connections for me. And then that sense of community that I already mentioned outside. I would also say this job, like academia, I don't remember who said it, but I've heard 1,000 times and I agree, it won't love you back. You could do everything perfect, you can mask your illness, you could do all the things, and it's still going to treat you like trash. So for me, it's been crucial to not make my identity be this. I can do research, I can love my work, and there's so many ways to do research, right? It doesn't have to be this like very narrow like R1 institution. It could be if you find your niche, you know. But having an identity outside, building relationships outside, you know, doing mutual aid, um, uh, keeping with your hobbies. That's the hardest thing to do when you're depressed or have a mental illness. Sometimes is doing the self-care things that you love, but finding the time for love. And there'll always be more work in academia. They will grind you down and like, you know, give you 80 hours of work per week. Finding that special time and treating it as sacred and doing the things you love, going hiking or doing crafting or playing video games or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. And tell some people no sometimes. D says, I loved the book Radical Self-Acceptance. And I'm going to have to check that out. I'll link that in the show notes. D says it's called Radical Acceptance, Embracing Your Life with the Heart of a Buddha. So I look forward to reading that. For my answer, I guess I would agree that sometimes finding a supportive mentor and supportive people who are further ahead than you in the professional development journey is sometimes more helpful than finding community at your current level, because you can band together with your friends all you like and say, this is great, I have people I can connect with. But if you don't have other people further up in the system that are helping you make those changes that are going to help you succeed, you're going to be stuck with like an army of solidarity people with you to support you, but it would be harder to make changes in your system, in your trajectory, without people further along to help mentor you. And to that end, I want to say finding a truly supportive mentor is a very difficult thing. And when you are looking for a mentor, for example, to join their lab or their research group, it's so important to talk to all of the people around them and not just them. How do their students feel about them? When they're not in the room, how do their students feel about them? How do their coworkers feel about them? Yeah, because a lot of times meeting people one-on-one, it's great, it's a delight, and then you hear about them behind the scenes and that changes drastically. So try to get multiple perspectives when evaluating potential advisors, I think would be my main piece of advice. All right, any final words before we end our call for today? Oh, yes. D says, how do you deal with disclosing specifics in general? Some people ask simply, what can I do to help, without asking for specifics. I find that pretty helpful. Yeah, I think that's a great idea because people want to help, but they don't know how. And if you give them tasks like, could you please give me a call tomorrow morning at 8 to make sure I'm out of bed? Or could you please come over and keep me company while I do laundry and clean up my house a little bit? Or yeah, concrete tasks are so much easier for people unfamiliar with your situation to latch onto. That's a great point. All right. Thank you both so much for joining me today and talking about these things. I'd love to continue the conversation some other time. I think that would be a lot of fun and very useful. Did either of you want to promote any of your own scholarship or resources or your business, maybe? Not yet. Okay.
Just one more, it's not my business or my scholarship, but just promoting, even if you don't want to do any work or volunteer with the union, do reach out to your representatives. If you're at UC Davis, that's Samantha Abbott, who leads our local chapter now. And if you want to read my you talked earlier, Jill, about finding community through like Twitter, for example. I don't know how much longer Twitter lasts, but if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Feral Heather, and I share a lot of resources relative to like disability and academia and that sort of thing.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording here.